r/NoSleep. I took a job as a night guard at an abandoned lighthouse. I wish I hadn't survived. The summer after I graduated high school in 1998, I needed a job fast. College was starting that fall, and my savings were laughably thin. I'd grown up in a small coastal town in Maine, where opportunities were scarce. The only job I could find was as a night guard at the old Whitestone Lighthouse. Whitestone had once been the pride of the town, guiding ships safely to shore for over a century. But it had been decommissioned years ago after a violent storm left it damaged and partially submerged in seawater. Locals whispered that it was cursed, stories of sailors who vanished, strange lights in the night, and a lighthouse keeper who had lost his mind. But $200 a week to guard an empty building sounded better than flipping burgers, so I took it. When I showed up for my first shift, the sun was setting, casting a crimson glow over the jagged rocks and churning sea. The lighthouse stood tall and silent, its once white paint now peeling and darkened with salt. Mr. Grayson, a retired Navy officer who managed the property, was waiting for me. "Stay on the main floor," he said, handing me a hefty flashlight. "Don't go up the spiral staircase unless you have to. And if you hear the bell..." He hesitated, eyes narrowing. "Just get out." "Why so cautious?" I tried to sound nonchalant, but my voice wavered. "The place is old," he said, eyes distant. "It's full of creaks and groans. Don't let it spook you." He paused. "But if you hear footsteps, leave." The sun disappeared, and Mr. Grayson drove off, leaving me alone with the wind howling like a living thing. The main floor was cold, filled with the scent of sea salt and mildew. My station was a small desk with an oil lamp and a tattered logbook filled with entries from long-forgotten keepers. I checked my watch, 8 p.m. time to start my first patrol. The sound of waves crashing against the rocks echoed around me, and the occasional creak of old wood made me jump. The beams from the shattered lantern room cast warped shadows across the stone floor. The first few hours passed uneventfully. I returned to the desk, settling into the creaky chair and trying to ignore the airy wail of the wind. By midnight, a thick fog had rolled in, curling through the broken windows and wrapping the lighthouse in a damp embrace. Then I heard it, the faint clang of the old lighthouse bell. My heart pounded. The bell hadn't rung since the storm had damaged the upper levels. I grabbed the flashlight and pointed it up the spiral staircase. Nothing. The sound came again, louder this time, echoing down the metal steps. "It's just the wind," I whispered, though I wasn't convinced. My feet moved toward the staircase against my better judgment. I climbed slowly, each step groaning under my weight. I reached the middle level where the keeper's quarters had been. The air felt colder, and the wind seemed to whisper unintelligible words. I shined my flashlight around, revealing dusty furniture and a broken lantern on the floor. Then I heard it, a low, rhythmic tapping from above. I froze. The tapping turned into footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving in circles around the lantern room. My pulse quickened as I remembered Mr. Grayson's warning. I turned to head back down, but the stairway behind me was shrouded in darkness. "Leave," a voice whispered from the shadows. I spun around, the flashlight beam catching a figure at the top of the stairs. It was tall and thin, cloaked in what looked like an old keeper's coat, its face obscured by shadow. But the eyes, they glowed an unnatural, cold blue. Panic surged through me as the figure stepped down, its movements disjointed, as if it were held together by something unseen. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. The bell clanged again, this time deafeningly loud, and the wind outside turned into a shrill scream. I stumbled back down the stairs, nearly falling in my haste. The footsteps followed, echoing with unnatural precision. I reached the main floor, flung the door open, and ran out into the night, the cold sea spray biting at my skin. The bell tolled once more, then fell silent. I looked back just once and saw the figure standing in the broken window of the lantern room, its glowing eyes watching me as the fog swallowed it whole. The police didn't believe my story. They said it was stress, isolation playing tricks on my mind. I quit the job the next day and never returned. 2 weeks later, a fisherman's body was found on the rocks beneath Whitestone, his face twisted in horror, his eyes open wide and empty. In the official report, it said he was likely caught by the waves during a storm. But I knew better. At night, when the wind howls and the fog creeps in, I still hear the bell, and that whisper, "Leave." Even years later, that night haunted me. I'd lie in bed, the muffled clang of the bell invading my dreams, the cold blue eyes seared into the corners of my mind. I moved inland, as far from the sea as I could get, taking up a job at a small hardware store in Augusta. The bustling town and distance from the coast should have been enough to push the memories away. But the nightmares persisted, vivid and unrelenting. On stormy nights, I would wake to the sound of rain tapping against the window, and for a brief moment, I would hear the bell again, louder than ever. It was as if it called to me, summoning me back to Whitestone. The rational part of me dismissed it as a trauma response, an echo of the dreadful summer night. But as the years passed, the occurrences became harder to ignore. One particularly cold November evening, I came home to find a letter waiting on my kitchen table, the envelope damp as though touched by the sea. My heart stilled as I picked it up, fingers trembling. There was no return address, only my name scrawled in an unfamiliar, jagged hand. I tore it open and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The words were smudged and uneven, as if written in haste. The bell tolls for those who have seen. Come back. A chill ran down my spine. I dropped the paper as though it had burned me and backed away. The bell's clang reverberated in my ears, so real that I clamped my hands over them, hoping to block it out. The sound persisted, relentless, until I screamed into the emptiness of my apartment. Then, as suddenly as it began, silence. I sat on the floor, gasping, surrounded by the shadows of my small kitchen. The letter stared up at me like a living thing. It took hours before I gathered enough courage to touch it again. I folded it carefully, locked it in a drawer, and swore to myself that I'd never go back to that lighthouse. But fate had other plans. The following morning, I awoke to the news. A storm had swept the coastline, and the Whitestone Lighthouse, abandoned for over a decade, had been found glowing in the night, its broken lights sweeping across the sea. Locals claimed they saw a figure in the lantern room, pacing in slow, deliberate steps. One fisherman, barely coherent, reported hearing a voice on the wind. It called out a name, he said to the local reporter, eyes wide with fright. Called for Michael. My blood ran cold. My name. It was summoning me. The compulsion to return was overwhelming. I fought it, pacing my apartment for hours, until the sun dipped below the horizon and the pull became unbearable. I found myself driving, barely aware of the icy roads and the towns blurring past. By midnight, I was standing at the edge of the cliff where Whitestone loomed, now more spectral than ever. The sea roared below, and the wind carried with it the scent of brine and decay. The lighthouse, now glowing with an unnatural light, looked like a towering specter. I clutched my flashlight, heart thundering as I stepped inside. The main floor was exactly as I remembered, dilapidated, cold, and filled with the same scent of salt and mildew. My footsteps echoed as I moved through the room, the beam of my flashlight casting long, dancing shadows. The logbook lay open on the desk, flipped to a page I had never seen. The ink looked fresh, the words stark. You returned. You shouldn't have. A sudden noise behind me made me spin around, the flashlight shaking in my grasp. The spiral staircase rose into the dark, a faint creaking coming from somewhere above. My breath caught in my throat as I heard it, the bell, ringing steadily now, as if marking my arrival. Who's there? I shouted, my voice cracking. Silence answered, followed by a faint shuffle and then the rhythmic tapping. I forced my legs to move, ascending the staircase one hesitant step at a time. The air grew colder with each level, and the whispering wind turned into a chorus of voices, overlapping, pleading, warning. The middle level was just as I'd left it all those years ago, the broken lantern, the overturned chair, and the sense of something waiting. My flashlight caught a glimmer in the corner, and I realized too late that it wasn't dust or shattered glass. It was eyes. Blue, glowing eyes. The figure stepped forward, revealing more of its grotesque form. The old keeper's coat hung loosely on a frame that was unnaturally thin, its limbs bending at sharp, unnatural angles. The face was gaunt, lips cracked and frozen in a grotesque smile. The eyes glowed brighter, locking onto mine. You shouldn't have come back, it whispered, its voice layered with dozens of others. The bell rang out again, louder and more insistent. I stumbled backward, the flashlight slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor, casting wild beams of light across the walls. The figure lunged, its movements jerky and impossibly fast. I turned to flee, my feet slipping on the worn stone. The wind screamed through the broken windows, and I felt the icy grip of a hand close around my arm. Pain shot through me as cold seeped into my bones. It's too late, the voices said. It's always been too late. Summoning strength I didn't know I had, I wrenched free and bolted down the stairs. The bell's toll followed me, now deafening. I burst onto the main floor and out into the stormy night. The sea roared, waves crashing against the rocks as if trying to drag me under. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, breath ragged, skin stinging from the spray. I looked back only once. The figure stood in the doorway, eyes still glowing, watching. The bell rang one final time, and then, nothing. I never returned to Whitestone, nor did I speak of that night. But the bell continued to haunt me, its distant clang a reminder of the debt I would always owe. And in the wind, when the night was at its darkest, I would hear the whisper, soft and inevitable. Leave. But I knew now that leaving wasn't enough. It never had been.